I'm Octavius Black, CEO of Mind Gym, and welcome you to the Mind Gym's podcast on office politics. I have with me here Oliver James, author of many great books, including Affluenza and a FU ... You Up. And he's a clinical psychologist of great repute. His most recent book is on office politics. And the review from the Mail on Sunday said, "I can't remember the last time I read such a useful and eye-opening book, but be warned, after reading it, you may never want to go to work again." With that thought in mind, Oliver, can you help us understand, is office politics a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's definitely a good thing. The problem is, most of us are terribly shy and coy about it. And what we need to do is actually embrace it. We need to embrace it with open arms, because the fact is that resources are finite, that people are competing for them, and if you want to get your way, you have got to be willing, I'm going to use the word manipulation, you've got to be actually skilled at manipulation. Office politics has this reputation as being all about, defaming other people, going around their back, stabbing them in the back. It's not about that, actually. Most of it is about simply working out how to be astute and effective in dealing, choosing the right person, using the right combination of tactics on them at the right moment.
So you're saying that actually in order to succeed in business, you need to be a masterful office politician?
There is really good evidence now that your score on the Gerald Ferris political skill inventory is a better predictor of whether you're going to be successful than your IQ score or your score on the big five personality traits, the classic HR metrics. It's become far more important than it used to be. Most of us are working in service industries. There was a time when you produced 100 widgets a day and got paid a certain amount per widget. It was all transparent. Today, what you get paid, whether you get promoted, depends enormously on whether your boss likes you at a simple emotional level, and also the perception of your performance becomes at least as important as what your actual performance has been. So office politics is hugely significant to whether or not you become successful.
So you're saying in the future, in businesses today, in order to succeed, you need to be very good at managing your reputation rather than necessarily being especially productive. How is that good for business?
I'm sorry to say that is the truth. And the evidence for this is interesting in that there's a whole new body of evidence about something called the dark triad of personality traits. These are psychopathy, being cold, ruthless, unempathic, amoral; Machiavellianism, which means compulsive game playing, very good at moving people around on the chessboard; and narcissism, which is me, grandiose, bigging yourself up. Now those three traits, if you have one of them, you're liable to have the other two. People with those traits are significantly, very significantly, overrepresented amongst senior managers. Senior managers are more likely to have those traits. And those are the people who are very good at taking credit for what isn't theirs, getting other people blamed for what were their mistakes, and also very good at spotting other people getting up to those traits and outwitting them. I'm afraid the world of the modern office is highly political, and of course it always has been, but it's become much more so.
Oliver, you're saying that these dark triad of characteristics are common in offices where people steal the credit and pass the blame. If we're working with people like that, what on earth do we do about it?
Well, I mean, if you've got, it's all a matter of degree. We're all somewhere on the spectrum of those traits. So all of us have it to some degree. Even the most innocent junior employee, and this is one of the most important things I would stress, is that junior employees often say, "Oh, I can't be bothered with that stuff. Oh, I don't want to be fooled. I don't want to." Actually, you're being a fool to yourself. For one thing, 1 in 5 communications within the workplace contain an untruth. The most naive and pious person in the workplace actually does engage in manipulations of some kind. So what my argument is to say, actually, face this up, be honest with yourself. You have to sometimes be fools. You have to sometimes ingratiate to your boss. If you want to get your way, you've got to do this stuff.
So are we teaching people so much in corporate life about being honest and true and authentic is in fact misplaced, and that you're better off being dishonest, untrue, and sometimes inauthentic?
But it's manifestly the case that you can't be honest and tell the truth all the time. Of course you can't, in any situation, let alone in the office, particularly in the office. What you can be is authentic. My contention is that what we're looking for in a way for everybody is to find that optimal, authentic personae, which may sound like sort of weasel words, but it isn't. Authenticity means being real and true, knowing what is real and true to you. Once you know that, you can find the right masks, if you like, the faces to put on to meet the faces that you meet. You can work out who you need to be in each situation. And that doesn't mean being completely false. Sometimes you're more real through acting a persona. Performance and acting are actually something we all automatically do all day long anyway, but I'm just suggesting be more deliberate about it and do it better.
Now, this skill of being a great office politician, is there any research that shows whether you're born or bred?
No, it's really clear now. One of the best kept scientific secrets is that the Human Genome Project, which has examined in minute detail the DNA of millions of bits of DNA in tens of thousands of people, is proving conclusively, really, that intelligence, personality, and your proneness to what's called psychopathology, towards mental illness, or indeed towards the dark triad of traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, these things are not in your genes, or very, very mild, very little impact of genes on these things. What is critical, in fact, is your early childhood experience. That sets your brain's electrochemical thermostat, and then subsequent experience. And these are the things that determine where you're at any one point in time. But that is really good news, because if it's not in your genes, it means there is big potential for change, much more than everybody used to think.
Is it change in your childhood? Is it about how you're brought up, or is it something you can change in adults?
You can change it in adults, but obviously it's easier to change it in childhood. If you change the way parents or whoever's caring for the children look after them in the early years, that's the fundamental thing. But obviously, once you're an adult, yes, you've got an electrochemical thermostat, but it is a thermostat, and the settings can be changed. All of us are on these traits of things like fearlessness, charm, things that generally we attribute to psychopath. Actually, all of us have them to a certain degree, and you can move the dial to a greater or less extent depending on what your childhood history is. You can change those things.
Say I'm in a large organisation and I have a programme for my most identified talented people with high potential. And if I listen to you, Oliver, I get the impression that being good at office politics will help accelerate their career path and increase their chances of shining at senior levels. So I'm now with the challenge of how do I help them accelerate their office political nous or skills. If you were to cover three things, what would you teach them?
I would first of all measure each of them in terms of the mix of their traits. I would then feed that back to them, and I'd feed back to them obviously the positives, of course, is where you start, but you also then intrigue them, interest them in the question of their psychology, and interest them in the potential for their talent to be even greater. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, if they're excessively narcissistic, for example, which plenty of people are, they're far too busy saying how wonderful they are at everybody else's expense, putting other people down in the process, making other people hate them. If they can understand that process is going on, they are capable of, especially if they're in the high talent group, they also have Machiavellianism, they also have a measure of psychopathy, so they're actually quite expedient people. And if you can make them see that they're scoring own goals by that component of their personality, it's surprising how much they're going to change.
So one element is to show them how their own characteristics are doing them harm.
Yeah.
So appealing very strongly to their self-interest. If you've got someone who's a strong narcissist and they manage to cover it relatively well, what then do you do to help them address that? Because some organisations have people with strong narcissistic tendencies that actually helps them be very successful in their jobs.
Absolutely, but there are components of that narcissism that are helping them. For example, they have exaggerated high self-esteem and have a huge confidence then, which enables them to be very good perhaps in negotiations or in making presentations. Perhaps they're very charming and quite sort of florid personalities, which helps them. But there are other components of that narcissism that are doing them harm. And if you can help them to see that, if you can help them to separate out the bits of narcissism that are doing them good and the bits that are doing them harm, they will thank you for it.
And what about the other elements of the triad, the psychopathy and the Machiavellianism? How do you help people address those?
Well, the psychopath is the most difficult because obviously in the pure psychopath, because they're amoral, but they are incredibly expedient. So in the end, if you can show them that, for example, showing absolutely no sympathy for colleagues whose parents have just died is actually doing them harm. They are actually, if you can actually help them to see that, then they can at least fake feeling some kind of sympathy. In the case of Machiavel's, they get the compulsive game player gets stuck into a situation where he's constantly thinking about who is my rival here, how can I outwit my rival, and they end up spending far too much time trying to kill people on their own team and not enough time trying to kill the opposition. Those people can be made aware of that, they can understand that, and they can still be celebrated for their incredibly clever ideas about how to, further the prospects of the organisation, but be discouraged from spending too much energy trying to put the people around them down.
And so if we look at the world of the future corporation, you think those that succeed will be those that teach these skills, that put up the mirror to the narcissists and to the psychopaths and to the Machiavels, and help give them some of the skills that refine and change that.
At the senior management level, at the lower level, I'm strongly in favour of trying to encourage organisations, trying to encourage junior employees to take office politics very seriously. And the interesting thing is that you may think, oh, hang on a second, but if all my employees become fantastic at office politics, surely it's just going to be like sort of snakes in a bag, you have the sort of mutually assured destruction of office political arms race. Wrong. Actually, when people get good at office politics, they start to advance their interests in rational, constructive, cooperative ways. They don't employ dirty tricks for the most part. And you will end up with a much more emotionally healthy organisation rather than a toxic office political culture.
Oliver, that's fantastically helpful and insightful and challenged many of our assumptions about what we should be helping people do and get better at in order to succeed in corporate life. Do you have one final thought for those of us who feel that perhaps we're not as strong at this as we would like to be? One little tip that we could take on board in order to master this a little more.
I always remember that somebody who was a friend of my parents was a chap called David Astor, who was the editor of the Observer newspaper. And David Astor was a very modest man, but I remember asking him for a tip, and he said, if there's one tip I would give anybody, it's flattery. It nearly always works with me. And he was a very shrewd man.
On that note, Oliver, you've been absolutely amazing, quite fantastic, and we're an absolute joy to have you do this podcast. For everyone, this is Oliver James, author of Office Politics. Thank you.
Thank you.